So, whilst we're waiting for everyone to join us today, please do introduce yourself in the chat. My colleague Leah has kicked off with an introduction. Let us know your name, perhaps your organisation, but we'd really like to know why you've joined us today. So we've still got people joining us, so whilst they're doing that, please do introduce yourselves in the chat. It's always lovely for our speakers to see who we've got here today. Fantastic. Thanks for kicking us off, everyone. I think we've got a real mix of people in the room, from those who support charity setups to those who are right in the early stages of setting up and registering their charity. So a real mixed audience today. Okay, so we're really proud to be working in partnership today with the Charity Commission and Proud Changemakers. And this is a really important topic, and I'm really glad to see you all here. So just to briefly introduce myself, my name's Amy Walton. I am Small Charity Support Manager at NCVO. My pronouns are she, her. I'm a white woman with dark hair, currently tied up. I'm wearing glasses, and today I'm wearing a yellow jumper. And I'm joined by my colleagues Leah and Josie, who are supporting on this webinar. Next slide, please, Josie. So just before we kick things off, a little bit of housekeeping to run through. There will not be a break during today's session, but if you do need to step away from your screen at any moment, please do. And I do hope you've got a coffee or a drink in hand. You'll notice that closed captions or subtitles have been enabled. So if you want to turn these on, you can click the CC icon at the bottom of the screen, or if you can't see that, if you click on the More button, you should be able to find captions from there. You can turn these on or off, and you can also adjust the size of them. Your microphones have been automatically muted today to prevent background noise, as there should be quite a lot of us in the session, and your cameras are off. Today's event is being recorded. By being here, you're consenting to being recorded. We will circulate a copy of the recording and the slides by email next week. And we're also adding a copy of the slides into the chat now, if you find it helpful to download them so you can zoom in and out. I'm not expecting any fire alarms where I am, but do keep an ear out for anything like this where you are. And just a reminder that this is a safe space where we respect one another and in the way we ask questions and interact in the chat. You can add any comments or reflections that you have in the chat, but I would ask that you please do keep to the Q&A function for any questions, which again, you'll find a link to that at the toolbar at the bottom of your screen. And we've got plenty of time for questions later on in the session. Next slide. So just a little bit about NCVO before we kick off. For anyone who is unfamiliar with us, NCVO is the largest network for charities and volunteering. We're proud to represent and support over 17,000 voluntary organisations of all sizes across England. And that's from the very biggest household name charities to the smallest community groups. And our members range across a wide variety of causes. But at their heart, they all have the aim of making the world a better place, much like many of you on this call, and we'd love you to join us if you're not already a member. Next slide, please. So by joining NCVO, you can save time and money, and as a member, only as a member, you get access to information and guidance, downloadable tools and resources, templates, discounted training, research, and more. And just a reminder there that for organisations with an income of under £30,000, membership is free. And this is all really useful stuff to have as you start your journey as a charity. Next slide. So we've got a jam-packed agenda for you today, a fantastic lineup of speakers. I'm kicking things off with welcome and introductions before I hand over to our first presenter, Neil Poole from the Charity Commission, followed by Aggie Taylor, who is one of our governance consultants here at NCVO. We'll finish off our speaker lineup with Luca Straker, who is the CEO of Proud Changemakers, a charity that has recently registered, and round it off with a Q&A and some signposting before we close promptly at 3:30. Next slide, please. So I just want to set the scene a little bit to kind of remind ourselves of why we're all here today and why this topic is important. So for a little bit of context, in my role at NCVO, I'm part of the practical support team, and one of the things that we offer to the sector is our small charity help desk, where we answer all your wonderful questions around the setup and running of voluntary organisations and charities. Around 10% of the inquiries that we get to the small charity help desk are about setting up a new organisation. And we see so much passion and a vision and a real commitment to the cause. But we also see a lot of uncertainty about the process you need to follow and a lack of understanding about what makes a charity and whether this is really the right vehicle for what you want to achieve. We know that registering a charity involves setting the right foundations from the start. Your charitable purpose, your legal structure, your governing document, making sure you've got the right trustees on board as well. And so we wanted to address some of those questions that we get through this webinar with the help of our friends from the Charity Commission and Proud Changemakers. Next slide, please. So this webinar will explain the role of the Charity Commission and how they assess registrations for charities. It will explain what a charity is and when it's required to register. We'll do our best to address some common myths and misconceptions about charities, and we'll outline the key steps to set up and register a charity in England and Wales. We'll also provide you with some insights from a recently registered small charity, Proud Changemakers, and finally we'll signpost to some further help and guidance. However, just a caveat that this webinar will not guarantee charity registration. It will not provide legal advice. It will not advise you which legal structure to choose. We can't possibly cover all aspects of setting up and running a charity, and it certainly won't help you to complete charity registration here and now. Okay, so before I hand over to our speakers, we're going to kick things off with a little bit of myth busting. So my colleague Leah is going to launch a poll for you in just a second. You should be able to see that on your screen. These are some things that we'd like to hear whether you think they're true or false. So you should be able to access the poll in front of you now. And we'd love to see what you think about these things. And these are some of the kind of myths and misconceptions that we're going to address in our presentations today. So I'm just going to give it a little bit longer to let everyone take part. Very interesting. Just going to give it a little bit more time because nearly everyone's participated. Okay, if we end that poll, Leah, and share those results. Okay, so we had 5 statements in that poll there, and it's really interesting to see the results, which you should have on your screen now, because it's a mixed bag for some of those questions. So we need £5,000 to register a charity. The answer is false, and I'll let Neil get into that. I'm not going to go into too much detail on these answers because these are the things that our speakers are going to address. I need to set up a charity to fundraise. Most of you said false, and that would be correct. The answer is false. You do not need to set up a charity to fundraise, and fundraising in itself is not a charitable purpose. All you need to set up a charity is passion for the cause and a vision. The answer would be false. You need a lot more than that. Some of the things that we talked about in the beginning there. Offering services for free means we are eligible for charity status. The answer would be false. And Neil's going to talk about what makes a charity and what makes a charity to register with the Charity Commission as well. And the final statement there, I can set up a charity alone. The answer there would be false. Ideally, you would need 3 unrelated trustees to establish your trustee board in the first instance. Okay. So without further ado, I'm going to pass you over to our first speaker of the day, Neil from the Charity Commission.
Hello everyone, my name is Neil Poole. My pronouns are he and him. I'm a white man and today I have a blue jumper on and a blue shirt and I have no hair. So I'm a senior manager for the registration division in the Charity Commission. And first, I'd just like to say thank you to the NCBO for inviting me along today to speak to you all. Things I'm going to touch on, as Amy's already mentioned, is explain the role of the Charity Commission, just tell you exactly what we do, talk a little bit about how the Charity Commission assesses charity registrations, talk about what is a charity, and also when is a charity required to register. So I'll start off with the next slide, please, which is explaining the role of the Charity Commission. So the Charity Commission was actually formed back in 1853. And if you're interested in this type of thing under the Charitable Trust Act, so we've actually been around for 172 years. And that's 172 years where we have been the regulator of charities. So we regulate charities through the life cycle of a charity. What we also do these days is we provide general advice and guidance, mostly online, but we also have a contact centre where we can provide general advice and guidance, but not bespoke advice and guidance. In terms of applying to register as a charity, that's really important to the Charity Commission because the first of the Commission's general statutory functions, which in plain English just means something that we have to do, okay, is determine whether charity institutions are or are not charities. So as the slide says, our role as both registrar and regulator is to assess if an organisation is charitable and to enter it onto the charity register if it is. So when you're applying to register, currently we register approximately 56% of the organisations to apply. So what that means is that approximately half are being registered and just under half aren't being registered. And what we're determining is, are you a charity or not? Now, if we determine that you are not a charity, that's not to say that the work your organisation is doing is without merit, or it isn't good work or good for society or altruistic or philanthropic in some way. It just means that you don't meet the requirements that's set out in charity law, which is a little bit complicated. What we'll try and do over the next 15, 20 minutes is just try and make that a little bit simpler to understand. One thing the Charity Commission isn't here to do, and it's beyond our regulatory remit, we're actually not allowed to do it, is to assist with the formation of a charity. Okay, so we can't help you set up a charity, but as I said, we do have general guidance on our website. There's a set up and register a charity page, which is divided into 6 different steps. And essentially, the first 5 steps are about setting up a charity. Within each of those steps, there's lots of resources, models, governing documents, example objects, or charitable purposes that you can use. So there is lots of guidance on our website that is general and resources to help you get to step 6, which is the bit when you then apply to register if you deem that you're eligible to apply. So if we could just go on to the next slide, please. Okay, so this slide is interesting in terms of what it should show you straight away is that not every charity in England and Wales is registered with the Charity Commission, and that may come as a bit of a surprise to many of the public. So, England and Wales, as two countries, are countries that really have a massive charitable sector. 350,000 charities in total. 170,000 of those are registered with ourselves at the Charity Commission. Again, in the next 10 to 15 minutes, we'll talk about why those ones register and others don't. Those with an income under £5,000, so there's about 70,000 charities in England and Wales with an annual income under £5,000. Okay, they do not apply to register with the Charity Commission. They actually apply to HMRC to have their charitable status recognised. So those organisations, just because they're not registered with the Charity Commission, it doesn't mean they're not bona fide charities. They are. It's just that because we have a £5,000 income threshold at which we will register, it means you apply with HMRC. The exception to the 5,000 rule is that there is a type of charitable structure called a CIO, which stands for Charitable Incorporated Organisation, but we'll just call it a CIO. If you are going to set up your charity as a CIO, and about 80% of the applications we receive these days of the CIOs, then you don't have to provide evidence of income. The reason you don't have to provide evidence of income is that a CIO doesn't come into existence until the day that we register it. So if it doesn't come into existence until the day we register it, then it's obviously not possible to provide proof of income beforehand. There's two other groups of charities as well called accepted and exempt charities. I won't go into lots of details about them, but there's about 100,000 accepted charities. Accepted charities are charities that are regulated by the Charity Commission but do not register with us. So, for example, there's certain types of religious charities with a specific income that don't have to register with us. And not only do they not have to register with us, they can't register with us. Exempt charities are neither regulated as a primary regulator by the Charity Commission, nor do they register with us. And an example of an exempt charity are universities. So universities are exempt charities. Their primary regulator is actually the Department for Education. But most organisations that are accepted or exempt charities will know this. It's not the type of thing that's sort of going to sneak up on an organisation and not going to know. Okay. If we go to the next slide, please. So, what is a charity? Well, that's what we'll go through. There's nothing else on this slide, so we can go to the next one again, please. Okay, so key thing is this charity is a legal status and it must conform to the regulations set out in the charity law, particularly the Charities Act. So as I said earlier, when we receive an application, we're making a legal decision. Okay, it's a decision against quite a complex legal framework. Last year, we received just over 10,000 applications. Each one of those 10,000 applications, okay, is a legal decision. As a consequence of that, our approach to the receipt of applications and how we assess them is robust. Okay, and there's a reason, or there's two reasons in particular why it's robust. It's one, to uphold the reputation and the integrity of the charitable sector, and secondly, it's also to ensure that we maintain public trust in the charitable sector as well. So, as a member of the public, if they see a registered charity number on a register, they rightly assume that we got that right, that when we received that application, we actually, we registered the things that are charities and we refused the things that aren't charities. And we got that right every single time. So as a consequence of the importance of public trust to the charitable sector, we are quite robust in the way in which we assess those applications. Conversely, though, we're not here to put obstacles in the way of charities and make charities who are doing great work in society from actually being able to thrive. We want charities to thrive as well. So, as a consequence, when we receive applications, even if that application isn't tip top, if we look at it and we think, right, there's a good chance that this organisation is probably a charity. We will take that into handling. We will take an enabling approach, and we will engage with the trustees and ask further questions to elicit the information we need to make that decision about whether it's a charity or not. Okay, if we can go to the next slide, please. Okay, so what makes a charity? There's four things, but we could put two into one and make it three. So there's whether you fall under the jurisdiction of the High Court of England or Wales, whether you have a charitable purpose, and whether you meet what's called the public benefit requirements, which we split up into being for the public and also providing a benefit. So what I'll do is we'll just delve into them in a little bit more detail and just flesh them out a little bit. So jurisdiction, first things first, we are the Charity Commission for England and Wales. Scotland has its own version of the Charity Commission. Northern Ireland has its own version of the Charity Commission. And all around the world, there will be variations on the Charity Commission. So it's important that when we talk today about what is a charity, we're talking about what is a charity under the law of England and Wales. So if you're in America, what is a charity and what defines a charity will be different to what it is here. So we're talking about England and Wales. Okay, you've got four main indicators that you would fall under our jurisdiction. Firstly, the governing document adopts the law of England and Wales. Okay, every charity has a governing document. This helps to establish and set up the charity, and then it's like the rule book by which you run your charity. That governing document needs to explicitly say that your organisation adopts the law of England and Wales. Also, the majority of the trustees must live in England and or Wales. The majority of an organisation's property must be in England and or Wales, and property will mean buildings, but it will mean assets and cash as well. So your bank accounts and your money needs to be in England or Wales. And also the centre of administration is in England and Wales. If you tick all of those four boxes, then you will fall under the jurisdiction of the High Court of England and Wales. Okay, so that's jurisdiction is relatively straightforward. Charitable purposes next. So this is two of the three things that make you a charity. Okay, an organization's purpose is what it is set up to achieve, and a charity's purpose is usually set out in the objects clause of its governing document, which, as I've just mentioned, is the legal document that creates a charity and says how it should be run. So when you get your governing document, it's normally clause 3. There's what's called an objects clause, and in that it will say what your charity's purpose is, and that charity's purpose won't be a big long list of aims or objectives or things like this. It'll be an objects clause, and your purpose should be expressed in quite a short paragraph. And I know there's a bit later on in this webinar where Aggie will actually be showing you a few examples of what a charitable purpose looks like. Okay, we could go to the next slide, please. So when we receive an application, we have a 7-stage process in terms of how we assess whether an organisation is a charity or not. One of the very, very first things we do is we look at the charity's purpose as it's set out in the objects clause of its governing document, and we then decide, right, does that purpose belong to or fall under one of the 13 descriptions of charitable purpose? So the 13 descriptions of charitable purpose are laid out in the Charities Act. And the easiest way to think of it is that they are just 13 categories of charitable purpose. Okay, so when we get an application, we look at the governing documents as well, we see what the object is. Our first question to ourselves is, does that purpose fall under one of these 13 descriptions of purpose? So does it fall under the prevention and relief of poverty? No. Okay, let's look at the next one. Does it fall under advancing education? No. Okay, let's look at the next one, and so forth. And that's how we'll do it. If right off the bat we see that the charitable purpose doesn't belong to one of those 13 categories of charitable purpose, then that gives us a very early indicator that this organisation might not be a charity. We then have to do the further 6 steps to determine that for definite. But this gives us a good idea early on whether you're a charity or not, whether you belong to one of these categories. Okay, if we do the next slide, please. Okay. A charity can have more than one charitable purpose. So, for example, a medical research charity may have a purpose in advancing health and a purpose in advancing education. So, if you just imagine a charity, for example, that is doing medical research into COVID-19, for example, okay, it would do that research, it would disseminate that research to the public, and in doing that, it would be advancing the education of the public because we could all learn from it. But also, they could then use that research in a medical arena to, improve the medication for COVID or the protection against it, stopping it in some way, and they would be furthering a purpose that falls under the advancement of health. They'd be making people actually better or stop them from getting sick. So charities can have more than one purpose. What I would say at this point is most charities only have one or a relatively small number of purposes. It's quite unusual to have a charity that has lots and lots of purposes. So when you apply, what I would suggest is that while um, the temptation will be to have as many charitable purposes as possible to show that you're really, really charitable, that's probably not the best way forward. You want to have a focused charitable purpose and a clear vision of what you're doing. Not least because if you then say you have lots of different charitable purposes, the application form will throw up lots and lots and lots of questions, different questions about each of those purposes. Okay. Next slide, please. Okay, to be a charity, your organization must have charitable purposes only. It cannot have purposes that are charitable and some that are not. Okay, so even if 90% of what your organization does and is aimed at a charitable purpose or purposes, if 10% of it isn't aimed at fulfilling a charitable purpose, it's not a charity. So 100% of what your organization is set up for and what it's set up to do has to further a charitable purpose. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, it might be obvious, but there's some things that aren't charitable. Fundraising in and of itself isn't charitable. That might sound counterintuitive. The reason for fundraising in and of itself not being charitable is that you could raise money and then give that money to something that doesn't further a charitable purpose. Political campaigning isn't charitable, so you can't support a political party, for example. And then if we just group unlawful activity and working against the public policy together, your charity can't have a purpose that you're not allowed to do in England and Wales under the law. Okay, so again, that would seem quite obvious, but it's just something to bear in mind. Okay, right. Public benefit requirements. So the Charities Act 2006 introduced the legal requirements that applicants must demonstrate they operate for the public benefits. So the Charity Commission cannot register a new charity which does not meet this requirement. And you could do a week, 8 hours a day on the public benefit requirements. It's a really, really complex legal concept that we have to sort of grapple with. But I will try and make it as simple as possible and just break it down into the two stark aspects. So if we can go to the next slide, please. Okay, so a charity must benefit the general public or a sufficient section of the public. So that doesn't mean that your charity has to benefit everybody all of the time. Okay, but what it does mean is that within the context of what your purpose is, you must be able to benefit everyone. So if you're a community centre in a local area of a city, then everyone in that geographical area would need to be able to benefit from it and be able to access it. But someone from another city wouldn't need to benefit from it. So it's within the context of the purpose. And then also, a charity cannot operate for the benefit of particular people, such as trustees, their friends, or their relatives. So, to give an example, a sensitive type of application we might get is if there's a child who's like sort of ill or terminally ill, or a person, and somebody wants to set up a charity to raise funds to sort of help that person, whatever it may be. And unfortunately, we can't register that as a charity because you can't set up a charity that only helps one person or a small number of people. It needs to be for the general public or a sufficient section of the public. Okay, and then if we just go on to the benefit aspect. Okay, So a charitable purpose must be beneficial. This is probably where you can just everyone can just apply a level of common sense in terms of, you know, if you go back to those descriptions of purpose, everybody would consider that relieving poverty is beneficial. Everyone would think that, you know, making people healthier is beneficial. That making people cleverer is beneficial. So you can broadly apply a sort of common sense approach to that. The other part of the benefit aspect is that any detriment or harm that results from the purpose must not outweigh the benefit. So, for example, if your charity is set up to help new mums in a developing country and their children, for example, on paper, that charitable purpose will look beneficial. But on the other hand, if the people going out there are sort of not qualified to help, or the equipment being used doesn't work, or so forth, then the actual detriment or harm to those people might be greater than the charitable purpose as it's written down on paper. It's much, much more complicated than that. But that's just one example to just sort of give you a slight idea. Okay. And then if we go on to the next slide, please. Okay, and this, I believe, is the final slide. Okay, so you've applied to register a charity online using our online application. When we receive that application, it goes through an intelligence check. And essentially, what that means is we just check that nobody who is applying to register is disqualified to be a risk rating. If your application is ready to register, we'll register it within 5 working days. If there's a small admin error or a couple of small admin errors, we'll register you within about 15 working days. If it's more than that, where essentially we can't tell from the charity from the application whether you're a charity or not, but you might be, okay, then it is goes into one of our queues where it will be picked up by our case officer or case manager, who will then engage with the trustees and try to elicit that extra information, like you said earlier, so we've got everything we need to be able to make a decision. And then that is obviously the next point. We make a decision: are you a charity or are you not a charity? And then once we've made that decision, everyone, and again, rightly so, is able to appeal the decision that we come to. The vast majority of those appeals will be if we decided not to register something. There's 2 vehicles for appeal. You can appeal for an internal decision review, where it will come to someone like myself, a senior manager in the registration team. We'll look at the whole thing again, okay, and we'll make sure whether we've made the right decision or not. Or the appeal can go to tribunal, and it doesn't have to go to decision review first. You can take us straight to tribunal if you want, and that is a court of law where the court will make a decision about whether we made the right decision in determining whether you're a charity or not. Okay, so just to conclude, we were to explain the role of the Charity Commission. The Charity Commission is the regulator of charities in England and Wales, and we make decisions about whether organisations are charities or not. How we assess charity registrations, okay, is we look at all of that stuff that we just gone through about whether something is a charity or not, and then we also take the income into account as well. What is a charity? Okay, it's those 3 things: exclusively charitable purposes, falls within our jurisdiction, and meets the public benefit requirements. And when is a charity required to register? Well, it's required to register if it meets all of those 3 requirements, plus it has an annual income over £5,000, with the exception is if you want to register a CIO. If you want to register a CIO, you don't have to have an annual income over £5,000. And that is everything from me. And I believe I am now passing over to Aggie.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Neil. That was a fantastic presentation, as I can see some comments coming up in the chat. Lovely to meet you all. My name is Aggie. I use the pronouns she, her. and I'm a white woman with brown hair and wearing a green jumper at the moment. I am a governance consultant in NCVO, and we'll be talking through the steps of registration, as Neil referenced in his one, building on lots of these things that Neil's been talking about, and hopefully making it a little bit more clear how you go about with that registering. So to kick us off, setting up a charity is an iterative process. That means you need constant refining and not always a quick one, as Neil alluded to in that final slide. I know we have lots of different people on the call at the moment, and the way we're going through these steps today is if you are setting up a charity yourself. So there are people who support people setting up charities, but at the moment we're going to be looking at setting ourselves into our into founders' shoes. If you are supporting people with charity setups, it is very important, and we need to do this as well in NCVO, not to stray into legal or professional advice. If in doubt, always refer to legal advice. And that goes to people who are looking to set up charities as well. If in doubt, do look for that legal advice. And we've got some good options on the NCVO's website. But if you are ready to set up an organisation, or you have an organisation that you're confident is charitable and you're looking to register, then you'll be finding your way to the Charity Commission website and starting through these steps. So step one looks at that quiz that Amy was looking at in the beginning, that bit that says, can you do this alone? And the answer is you can't do setting up a charity alone, because the first step is recruiting your board of trustees. The other reason you can't do it alone is because it's a lot of work. You wouldn't want it on someone else. But all charities are run by a board of trustees, and you can't have just one person on that board. You need to have at least 3 unrelated trustees to set up. And best practice actually looks at between 5 and 12 trustees. So you have enough people around the table to be making decisions. Trustees are volunteers and they have legal responsibility for the charity and ensure that the charity is doing what it's set up to do in line with those charitable purposes. So a charity can't really be that one-person mission. Trustees as unpaid volunteers are one of the defining pillars of the charity sector. And to find out more about those roles and responsibilities, we really recommend going to the Charity Commission Guidance CC3, the Essential Trustee, which sets out the legal duties of a trustee. But all trustees have to act in the charity's best interest. They have to manage the charity's resources, so money, property, or staff, responsibly. They have to make sure the charity is acting in line with the law, and they have to be always ensuring that the charity is carrying out its purposes. There are some limits on trusteeship. For example, if you're registering a CIO, a charitable incorporated organisation, which is one of those legal structures that a charity can take, your trustees need to be over the age of 16, and you need to be over 18 for some of the other forms of a charity. You also might be disqualified from being a charity trustee, either by the Charity Commission. So someone could be, if they've been mismanaging and not following those trustee duties, they might be disqualified by the Charity Commission. Or there are some certain automatic disqualifications that stop people from being a trustee. And that's mainly around if a trustee is unfit to work with children or with vulnerable people. So you've got to make sure when you're recruiting that trustee board that none of your trustees have either been placed on the sex offender registry, have been charged with bribery or bankruptcy or terrorist activities, or have been removed from being a trustee for another charity. It's also a good opportunity to, while you're looking for those 3 unrelated trustees who aren't automatically disqualified or previously disqualified, to be thinking about how you can bring in different skills, different voices and different roles at this point. This will help you in setting up for good discussions and mean that you might have good availability to take on the work, both in setting up the charity, but also that further work down the road. You want a well-networked board if possible, with lots of skills and different viewpoints on it. Once you have that trustee board, moving on to step 2 now, you'll be thinking about how you decide your legal structure. And there's 2 key decisions to make, which before you can kind of even decide which structure you're choosing. And the first of these is thinking about, do you want a trustee only or a wider membership who can make decisions in the running of your organisation? If a charity is governed entirely by its trustees, those trustees are the only constitutional members of the charity. They're the only ones who can make crucial decisions, such as who else sits on the trustee board, whether to make changes to your constitution. They're the only ones who are going to be making those decisions. If a charity has a wider membership, it's more democratic, and those trustees will be accountable to those members. So there are some decisions that only members would make in those charities, such as electing trustees, approving the annual accounts, and approving those changes to the constitution. If you think a membership organisation works the type of organisation that you are, you want to be thinking carefully about how large that membership is, as the charity has duties towards those members, such as keeping a register of the members and inviting them to participate in the meetings and vote around decisions for the charity. Types of charities that have membership are often called associations or societies, and usually will have a membership that is beneficial, or should have a membership that is beneficial to the purposes of the organisation. The second of the key decisions that you're thinking about when deciding which legal structure you want to be taking is thinking, do you want to be incorporated or unincorporated? An incorporated charity is one that has a legal form, like a company, that gives the charity its own legal personality. It means it can own property, it can sign contracts, all in the charity's own name. Incorporation gives trustees greater protection from being held personally liable for the decisions and the actions of the charity. If your charity that you're looking to set up is looking to employ people or rent property, for example, it's not normally you'd choose to be incorporated, as you have those protections while going into those contracts. However, having those added protections does come with some tighter legal regulations and control, including the need to arrange for an annual independent examination of your charity's accounts if your income goes over 25k a year. And you also need to be submitting your charity's annual reporting accounts to the Charity Commission, and they will then publish it online. If you are becoming an unincorporated organisation, you don't have a legal personality. And so when you're entering into those contracts, you're entering as the group of trustees and not as a legal entity that is separate from them. This means contracts are signed by one of those trustees, who then might hold more personal liability for any debts. This is best for charities that don't expect to be renting premises, owning property, or employing staff, as there's less kind of risk when it comes to that kind of action. We now have the kind of four most common types of legal structure up on the screen that you can decide about. It's worth saying neither us in NCVO or the Charity Commission can tell you which structure to choose. That's a decision for your trustees, who you recruited at the beginning, to make. But we can run through a little bit about what they look like. So a charitable trust is an unincorporated organisation, no members, only trustees, whose main job is to look after an asset, whether it be property, land, a large amount of money, for the benefit of others. You have a charitable unincorporated association, which is a small, quite informal way to operate, usually a group of people doing something good in a community with a small amount of structure. Then on the incorporated side, which has that legal entity, you have a company, charitable company limited by guarantee, which is also called a CLG, which have dual regulators. So your trustees are trustees and registered with the Charity Commission, but they're also directors and regulated with Companies House. So you send off 2 sets of annual accounts and returns each year. And then you have that most common for new charities registering, the CIO, which is a charitable incorporated organisation. And most new charities choose this. It has that greater legal entity, just like a CLG, but you don't have to register with 2 regulators. So that is why we're seeing most new charities are setting up as a CIO. There are 2 forms of CIO you can choose from: an association with members, and a foundation, which is without members. The choices you make at this stage will affect what type of constitution or governing document your charity will adopt. So what is a governing document? It is a live legal document which trustees should be very familiar to and refer to regularly. Essentially, it's a set of rules that lay out how you're going to run your charity. In it, you have your purposes, your objects, as we were talking about earlier. You also have the powers of your charity. So if you can buy land, if you can employ people, if you can merge, if you can take out loans, if you can close down as an organisation, all of that will be set out in your governing document. It'll also put how your trustee arrangements, so how many trustees need to be in a room for a decision to be valid, how trustees are appointed, and how people stop being trustees. For example, if they're not attending meetings, or if they have been a trustee for a certain amount of time. All of those things are found in your governing document, which is the third step in setting up your charity, deciding what that governing document is. So we now have how different legal structures link to different governing documents on the next slide. And we really want to be clear here that we don't want you to be reinventing the wheel with a governing document. They are quite long and often complicated documents, and the Charity Commission has some really good model governing documents. We strongly recommend you use those, as if you complete one of these correctly, it's more likely to get you registered more quickly and easily, as the Charity Commission know what's in there and they're not having to look through a new kind of legal document. There are different governing documents depending on the legal structure you choose. To highlight a couple, if you are a small charity with an annual income of under 5,000 that doesn't own a building or employ people and doesn't intend to register with the Charity Commission, you could use the Model Constitution for small charities. This you can't use to register as a charity, but you can use it while you're waiting to register. We'll mention this in a moment with thinking about bank accounts. If you are doing a charitable trust, you use a trust deed. An incorporated association, there's a model constitution. For a charitable company limited by guarantee, there's model memorandums and articles of association. And for CIOs, there are CIO foundation and association models all up on the Charity Commission website. So we really recommend having a look at those. With your step 4, you're thinking about your charitable purposes. And so once you have your trustees, you've decided your legal form, you've chosen your legal governing document, you'll think about how you turn your purposes into your charitable objects, as Neil was mentioning earlier. Your purposes will set up what you want to achieve, and it needs to fit into one of those 13 descriptions of purposes listed in the Charities Act, making sure it's for the public benefit, so meeting that public benefit requirement. It's important you get these right, as it's how the Charity Commission will decide if your organisation is a charity. It's how HM Revenue and Customs will decide if it qualifies for tax relief. It's how anyone joining, supporting or benefiting from your charity will understand what you do, who you help, where you operate and how you work. And for your trustees, it's important as it'll set out the limits of what your charity can do and what you have to be thinking about when thinking about your strategy and your delivery and how you operate as an organisation. When writing these charitable purposes, it's important to think about, and an easy way to kind of structure it is to think about what, where, who, and how to write these in a clear way that's going to be clear for those people that we just spoke about. So thinking about the what, you're thinking about what is your charity set up to achieve? You need to make sure that what is an allowable charitable purpose, always referring back to those definitions of charitable purposes. When you're thinking about the who, you need to be thinking about how a registered charity can benefit that significant section of the public or animals. This is called that public benefit. You can specify which section of the public, for example, people living in poverty or children with rare diseases or homeless people. And you could specify what animals, if you're doing a charity around animals, so elephants, tigers, lions, whatever it is, cats and dogs. The point is, however, your charity has to be open to anyone or any animal that fits within that description of your charitable purposes. And it has to be public and not private. When you're thinking about where, if your charity purposes don't say where you plan to operate, the assumption could be made that it'll include everywhere, the whole world. That might raise questions around your capacity to manage or to deliver services on a worldwide basis. It can be easier for you to think about the geography in which you'll operate, whether that's a town, a county, a region, or a country. If it is only a local area, it could be helpful to use wording such as anywhere in the district of, and then you might put a local authority area, and especially, and then enter a smaller locality, which will give you the opportunity to expand at some later stage. So while you might want to narrow down from everywhere, you probably don't want to go too narrow that you're limited about where you can operate. Thinking about how you're thinking about what your charity will do to tackle the problem of what it was. Say your charity is set up that something that isn't charitable, and then it won't be seen as a charity. You need to state clearly what your purpose is. If it's not clear, the Commission won't be able to be certain that it is charitable, and they'll come back with more questions. You want to be precise when you're writing up your purposes, using plain and simple language, avoiding vague or ambiguous wording. You want to make it easy for everyone to kind of engage. If there are terms that could be not generally understood or might have more than one meaning, it's good to kind of explain those in that. And if your charity has more than one purpose, make sure all are included in your objects. We do have a couple of examples here. So this one, which is from the Charity Commission web register, says to provide facilities and services at the Hill End Outdoor Education Centre to advance and improve the education and physical and social welfare, primarily but not exclusively, of children and young people through outdoor activities. So if you go through the who, what, where and how, you can see that their what is to advance and improve the education and physical welfare. Who they're helping are children and young people. Where at the Hill End Outdoor Education Centre, and how by providing facilities and services, and that could be outdoor activities. So you can see that they put in that who, what, how and where in their purposes. We have another example which looks at the relief of those in need for reason of being or having been or at risk of being victims of slavery or human trafficking, in particular by the provisions of charitable assistance, including casework, counselling, advocacy and associated support services. So once again, we can see that what being the relief of the needs of the victims of slavery or human trafficking or those at risk. Who are those victims or those at risk? They haven't done aware, but that might be fine. They're confident in that one. Not all charitable purposes do include that where. And then there's how, which is that provision of charitable assistance, which includes caseworking, counselling, advocacy, and associated support services. So both of these examples are trying to be as clear as possible without being too restrictive. And we really kind of advise of not narrowing yourselves down too much at these stages. For example, if you want your charity to support children, if you say children 5 to 10, that's all you can do. So just children is better than specifying the ages. If you want them to develop social skills through sports, if you say football, then you need to do it through football. If you say sports, you have more room to maneuver. Being clear about that what and how is also really important. For example, you might have organisations where advancing the education is what your charity is doing. You might have organisations where the how that they're doing is through education. So making sure you include both of those things can assist you in passing that legal test. Once you have step 4 done, you need to be considering about if you need a bank account, and that is step 5 of the process. So a bank account is not a requirement for setting up a charity, but for lots of structures with the Charity Commission, they will require proof of income as part of that registration process. And it's that CIO one that doesn't require proof of income. So you will often need to be thinking about a bank account before you're registering with the Charity Commission, which puts you in a difficult position as sometimes the bank will require you to have a constitution. So here we can use that Charity Commission's Model Constitution for Small Charities that we mentioned earlier as a temporary solution to see you through that chicken and egg stage. But you can't use that constitution to register with the Charity Commission. So once you have your bank account, you might set up your other constitution and then register and then go back to your bank and say, this is our new constitution. So it's a little bit complicated in there. If you are registering as a CIO, you don't need to be providing proof of income as there's that no minimum income threshold. And so you can register without opening a bank account first. So it'll be optional on the registration form around that. We can't recommend any bank accounts, but we do have links on our website to the Charity Excellence Framework, to the UK Finance Pinpoint, in order to kind of have a look and think about what bank account is going to be most useful for you. Once you've made that decision, you come to the checklist before step 6. And this checklist is about checking, do you have your trustees? Have you chosen your legal structure? Do you have your governing document that links to that correct legal structure? Have you written your charitable object with that how, who, what, and where? Do you need a bank and are you ready? And then have you got those supporting documents that link with those? So those supporting documents will include your charitable purposes, how you're running that charity for public benefit, and proof of income if you need it. And that proof of income might look like a recent bank statement or published annual accounts. When you're thinking about the documents you need to give for your charity, you need to include your charity's name, recent accounts, your trustees' names, dates of birth and contact details, trustee eligibility declaration forms that you can find and download from the Charity Commission, and a copy of your charity's governing document. Gathering all of those things in one place will make it easier when you're ready to submit, rather than having them kind of everywhere. But once you've got them, you're on to step 6, which is very exciting. And that is when you can be applying for registration, which is on the next slide. This is where there are a few little things you want to be thinking about. So you want to be careful if your governing document needs to be signed by hand. For example, the trustee eligibility form, which is what you fill out to say, yes, I can be a trustee, needs a wet signature. So you need to sign that by hand, not electronically. So you need to check that with your governing document as well. We really recommend taking time on your application. We think that it often takes kind of 3 months after starting an application before being ready for that registration. So don't think, oh, I've set aside a weekend, let me just quickly get that done. And as we said at the beginning, it's not a one-person job. You should get an automated response within 48 hours, but then you're looking at much longer response, depending on how many kind of questions come back. So do be ready to engage with the Charity Commission and take some time to process and review. It's not a quick process, but hopefully some of those steps made it a little bit easier for you. That is my whirlwind tour of those steps. So thank you so much. I'm going to be passing to Luca to hear all about how it went when they did it. Thank you.
Thank you. And yeah, my name is Luca Straker. The pronouns that I use are they, them. I'm a white person with short brown hair and quite a fetching tartan kind of shirt on. So I am the CEO of Proud Changemakers. Proud Changemakers is, well, we're a CIO. There's been lots of talk about CIO. We set up as a CIO earlier this year. Our purpose, we are there to support LGBTQIA plus people who are working or volunteering in the charity sector. We're there to elevate, to advocate and support every single person out there who is either LGBTQI plus in the charity sector or is an ally of the LGBTQI plus community. So we have things like we have a podcast, we've got blogs on our website, we do sessions with charities around how to be more inclusive for queer people, and we're in the process of launching our membership, and we've got lots of other exciting ideas as well. We're fully volunteer led as well. We don't have any paid staff at this moment, but hopefully that will change in the future. So I'm here to talk about the 5 things that we learnt whilst we registered as a charity. We were set up a couple of years ago, and then we went through our registration at the beginning of this year to become a CIO. So yeah, the first thing we learnt was less is more. Here when we put together our application to be registered as a charity, we put lots of information in there. We tried to be put loads and loads of stuff, loads of things that we planned to do, and we wanted to give as much information as possible to the charity. We wanted to be as transparent as possible. However, what we learnt was that the more information we put in there, the more those elements got questioned. We received a number of queries back from the Charity Commission about all different aspects of our application. And what we took from that is actually, as Aggie was just saying, about being really clear and concise on your application as to what it is that you're doing, and what your plans are, your objects are, and all those elements, and actually just to be quite concise with it, and quite open-minded with it, because like I say, everything was questioned and then corresponded with one section to the other section. And that's why one of the first things that we did when we were looking to answer this question of what we learnt, the first thing that came up was like, let's put only the essential information on your application form. That would be one of our top tips. So yeah, and then the second one, second element that we learnt was having a point of contact within your team. So like I said, we're a volunteer-led organization. And so, you know, we are always grateful. I'm always grateful for everybody who volunteers their time, their spare time, because I mean, not many people have spare time at the moment. And what we found was having one person whose sole role essentially was to drive the application to be to register forward. So they were chasing either the commission or chasing people within our organization and collating all the information, making sure the questions were answered within the time frame, and liaising with the Charity Commission. You know, and then if the Charity Commission had any questions for us, they knew exactly who to go to, and there was nothing missed. It didn't go into kind of like a random inbox that nobody was checking. And like I said, the Charity Commission would give us for quite short time frames for answering those queries. So it just meant that we stayed focused and we stayed on track, and we got the right bits of information back to the Charity Commission within the time frame. Speaking of which, we had this. We are a fully remote organization, so we have people all over the country. And when these queries from the Charity Commission would come back to us, like I say, we'd have like 1 or 2 weeks to respond. And what we quickly established was having a sign-off process with our trustees and with myself and the kind of the senior members of the organization, so that we could respond promptly within that short window. We could respond kind of in a united front as well. So the trustees made collective decisions. Those those answering the questions, but also kind of like giving the right information and making sure that everybody was happy with the response that was going in. We knew when it was going in, we knew how it was going in, and everybody was happy with that. And we did lots of stuff on email, lots of any meetings that we had. We fully noted them to make sure that we could show a full kind of audit trail of everything, all the decisions that had been had. And so that was really, really important that we had that sign-off process, because then there was no areas for like ambiguity within our organization. Everybody knew what the answer was going in. Everybody was happy with what was going back. And so that made for us having no real issues within our organization, and also that gave a strong impression back to the commission that we knew what we were talking about, and we were experienced and knew our stuff essentially. One of our so my little snapshot in my career, I've spent an awful lot of time in like voluntary infrastructure, and therefore kind of having built my network of charity professionals has been an absolute like godsend for me, to be honest. Like I say, this process of registering as a charity was quite long. It took us probably about 6 to 8 months in total, just kind of when we decided we were going to register to us actually registering. And like I say, webinars like this and just being able to contact different organizations, like I've put in there, like obviously NCVO, but NAVCA as well, and noticed there's a lot of local infrastructure people on the call. I used to work for NAVCA, so kind of understand local infrastructure well, and what was one of the big things I would always encourage people to do is speak to local infrastructure bodies, speak to people like NAVCA, Kivo, Charity Finance Group. We were very lucky to have good contacts with the LGBT consortium as well. And all of those kind of advice and spaces where we could go and ask for different either tips or advice or kind of just guidance from all of those organizations. I contacted every single one of those organizations essentially during our registration process. And I just encourage lots of people to do that. But also, use your own networks as well. You know yourself, the cause that you're working towards. So use your networks, use the people around you who are knowledgeable in these areas. And then my final point is a really, really big one for us. Like I said, it took us probably about 6 to 8 months to become registered from start to finish. And we were really excited to submit our application to the Charity Commission. But then when we got a lot of queries coming back and a lot of questions coming back around all different aspects of it, it was quite draining, and because every time we submitted it, we thought this was going to be the moment, and then it just felt like it was never going to happen. And we had all these knockbacks, all these questions from the commission, which understandably so, but for us it was, every time we got that response, it just felt quite frustrating. What helped us massively was the fact that we have a really good group of people who really are committed and working towards what we wanted to do. And we were able to lift each other up. We were able to support each other when one person was feeling quite hit by it, then other people were able to help and support them. We also meant that we had a strong space where we could openly discuss how we were going to respond to the questions and to the queries from the commission, because not as you know, you get a group of people together, not everybody agrees on every single point. And so we created spaces where we could have really open and honest conversations without judgment, without criticism. It was really kind of very supportive, and it meant that because we were challenging each other, it meant that our responses and the way we shaped and looked at our organization was robust. And that's why I say it's really, really important to have that healthy space where everybody can contribute and everybody can feel safe to contribute. And I put that at the bottom, like, if you ever get the feeling it will never happen, I had that feeling during our process, but I was able to, we have a really good board, we've got really good chair, we've also all the other volunteers all on hand, ready to support. Everybody was really there to support one another, and I just think that that's one of the most important things to do, especially when it's a volunteer-led organisation, because, like I say, we're doing this just for the absolute love of it as well. So that's my final point. I think they've put the link for Proud Changemakers in the chat. So if anybody wants to kind of find out more about us, then click the link and get in touch. I think I'm handing back to Amy.
You are. Thank you so much, everyone. Josie, if we could just put the slides down so we can all see each other again. And maybe just spotlight Aggie as well there. Thank you. Absolutely fantastic presentations from everyone. Hopefully everyone learned a lot there. And Luca, thank you for sharing the experience. Full disclosure, I am a trustee of Proud Changemakers, so I also went through that experience with Luca and the rest of the team. Oh, some really lovely comments coming in the chat there for all of you. Okay, let's skip ahead to the Q&A. I've got lots of questions that have come in. I just want to caveat that we might not be able to get through them all, but that doesn't mean they're forgotten. We're going to note them down, and I will come back to you next week with answers to all the questions that we haven't managed to get to. And I might just group some of the questions together. So if it doesn't sound exactly the way you've worded it, it might still be your question. Okay, so I'm just going to get into our first question there. Quite a few people have asked Neil whether you can repeat the time frame. So how long after an application is made can you expect the Charity Commission to give a response, move to appeal, etc.?
Yeah, so we triage everything within 48 hours. If it's ready to register, we'll register it in 5 working days. If there's like a little admin error, for example, I don't know, you forgot to add your trustee declaration to the form or something, then we'll get back in touch with the trustees. As long as they get back to us quickly, then we'll register that within 15 working days. Where it then changes, and it's probably more similar to Luca's experience, is if when we receive an application, if we don't know from the application whether it's a charity or not, then it goes into a queue. And the queue at the moment, we've got a big backlog. So at the moment, we've got a backlog of 16 weeks. So even though it was looked at in the first 2 days, it'll then sit in the queue currently at the moment for 16 weeks, which obviously we're working hard to try and get down. And then it will be picked up by a case officer. from that point onwards, the aim of a case officer or case manager when they get your application is to just do one write out or one phone call, get all of the information back that they need, and then make a decision to register. That's our aim. That doesn't always happen. What I would say is if you're being asked questions, it tends to be a good thing. It might not feel it at the time, and I get that entirely, because if we don't think you're a charity, we'll tell you very quickly, and we'll reject it. So if you're getting asked questions, you're getting asked questions because we think you probably are a charity, but we just need to check some things because it's a legal obligation of the Charity Commission. If you are a charity and you're required to register, we have to register you. So therefore, we can't just reject things willy-nilly as such. So yeah, so essentially the better the quality the application, the quicker it will be. But that's not always the case because it depends exactly what you're doing and how complicated it is what you're doing. So a food bank, for example, is probably going to get registered much more quickly than something that has got a purpose in international conflict resolution in another country. It's going to be a lot more of a complex application.
And when you come back to those applications with questions, Neil, you often point to guidance, Charity Commission guidance, and you'll also include a copy of the application, right? So that they can refer to that.
Yeah, of course. I mean, and that's often what we try to do, and we're increasingly trying to do, is take a more proportionate view where rather than asking questions, we'll actually go, well, this is the responsibility of the trustees to do this anyway. So rather than us ask, 10 questions about it, we'll give advice and guidance, signpost to people, put the ball in the trustees' court and say, okay, we'll register you, but make sure you follow all of that guidance as well. So where the risk is right and it's proportionate for us to do that, we're always looking to try and do that instead of just asking lots and lots of questions repeatedly.
Thanks, Neil. And just a quick follow-up question. I mean, we could talk about it for the rest of the webinar, AI, but there's a very interesting comment here that apparently from the Charity Commission, you've said that more and more registration applications are seemingly created by AI, resulting in doubling the number of applications, and the consequence is delays in approving charity applications of up to 120 days.
We've seen a massive spike in applications that we're receiving from AI. Now, I don't want to go against the government or the Charity Commission, which very much embraces AI and the use of AI. At this moment in time, our lived experience in registration is that AI doesn't seem the best tool to submit an application, and a lot of the AI applications that we receive aren't really fit for purpose at the moment, and therefore that's caused a massive spike in the number of applications we received, and obviously we have to deal with every single one of them as well. So that's what the AI spike in applications is, not the whole reason, but part of the reason where our current backlog has come from.
And can you just give us a little bit of reassurance, perhaps, that if it is a genuine application with no admin mistakes, it would generally take less time than 120 kind of days to.
Oh yeah,
yeah,
of course. I mean,
Right.
from the point that it's with a case officer or a case manager, it should be relatively quickly. From that point of view, the delay at the moment for ourselves comes with that. After that initial triage, if it's not low risk and it's not ready to register, that's then when it goes into a queue to be dealt with by a case officer. So, but once you've received an email from a named case officer that you'll be able to sort of liaise with and get in touch with and work with, and who will be an expert and will be really good at sort of progressing your application, then from that point onwards, it should be a much quicker and smoother application process.
Fantastic. Thank you, Neil. I'm going to direct my next question to Aggie. A little question here about the process of converting a CIC to a charity. Is it the same? What's the difference here?
Thank you, Amy. So CIC is a community interest company, and it's not charitable, though it is set up to benefit the community, which means it has an asset lock, which means that the money that it's used money that it has can only be used for kind of purposes that benefit the community. However, they don't have to be charitable purposes completely. A community interest company can also invest some of its money to benefit kind of stakeholders or shareholders in the organisation, which a charity can't do because that wouldn't be a charitable purpose. So we do see community interest companies that do things that might be considered as charitable. However, then they have aspects of their organisation that aren't charitable. So that's why they're not a charity. If you are a community interest company, there are only two ways that you can stop being a community interest company, and that is either by dissolving the company and not existing or converting to a charity. So we do see lots of community interest companies convert to charities. The process is you have to close down the community interest company and register the charity. So you have to go through all of these steps and then transfer your assets. Obviously, you don't close down and then register because we know that registering takes a little bit of time. You would first register with the Charity Commission. You'd go through and talk about what your objects are. You'd go through the same process, making sure that the objects are all charitable and that you don't have anything that isn't uncharitable. And then once you're registered, you would close down being a CIC. You'd tell the CIC regulator that you were closing down, and then you'd transfer your assets and your funds to that kind of new organisation. But you do have to go through all of that process of setting up. Yes.
Yeah, so in short, it's not really a conversion because you do have to kind of set up a new charity. And as a follow-up, we've had a question around kind of, can you hold both charity and CIC status? As Aggie's illustrated there, no, you can't, because a CIC is not a charity. It doesn't have charity status. Gosh, we've got lots of questions coming in. I'll do my best. Okay, let's go for some quick fire ones, if we can. Open to kind of Aggie or Neil. Why would you be a charitable trust, or let's broaden it, why would you go for an unincorporated form instead of a CIO? Are there any benefits of where this might be the best course of action?
Should I answer that?
Go for it, Neil.
A charitable trust is this what it is. A charitable trust is the simplest form of a charity structure. Essentially, it's the most straightforward. Normally, like a grant-making organisation would be like a charitable trust. The company equivalent of that is a CIO foundation model. And the reason you might choose to be a CIO foundation model is if you want the simplicity of a charitable trust, the similar sort of governing documents where only the trustees make decisions, but you want the benefits of the CIO structure, which is protected liability and being a legal entity, which makes buying property and so forth more straightforward.
Thank you. I think that answered the question. Okay, we've talked a lot about the £5,000 threshold, when that applies, when it might not apply. We often get this on the Small Charity Help Desk, actually, in terms of when an organisation has gone just over £5,000, but they might not sustain that. They've got a constitution, members, monthly meetings, an AGM. They've been very successful at fundraising and they've just got over £5,000 in their bank. Do they need to consider registering as a charity?
If it's just the one-off, and it, like for example, they've got a history before where it hasn't been over 5,000, they know going forward it's not going to be 5,000 again. They don't need to register. But if they have 2 continuous years where it goes over 5,000, then you would have to apply to register.
Thank you. And another one for you, Neil. Hopefully, you might know the answer to this. We understand there's a consultation about village hall model constitutions. I think that's with ACRE. Do you have any idea on the timeline for this or when these might be available?
I don't, I'm afraid. I'm not aware of that at the moment.
We might be able to look into that and see if we can get an answer out in the follow-up there. Sorry, Neil, I'm hitting you with all the questions here. I'm trying to get them all out of the way. Okay, if an organisation, it's a PTA in this instance, they're noted as removed when they search the charity number on the Charity Commission website. What does that mean? And is there any way that they can reinstate that?
There's a number of reasons why something could be removed on the register. One of the main reasons something is removed, though that doesn't mean that that's definitely what it is, but a lot of the time it's where that charity hasn't fulfilled its report requirements for 2 or 3 years. So there's no evidence that charity is actually operating anymore. So therefore, it'll be removed from the register. So what was the rest of the question? Sorry.
Is there any way of getting it reinstated?
Okay, so no. Essentially, what you need to do is you need to apply to register again, and it would be a new charity as such. Even if it's got all the same people involved and it's doing the same thing, it would be a new legal entity, and you'd need to apply again. But with PTAs, there's an umbrella body called Parent Kind. They've got approved governing documents. If you go to them for help and essentially do everything they say, they're the main umbrella body. Those applications, they are very much fast tracked when they come through because they're pretty straightforward. We know what PTAs do. So that would be at the quicker end of the application process, where we'd hope to be able to register that within 5 days of receiving your application.
And that's a really good top tip and links very much to Luca's point there about kind of using the networks available to you, and also what Aggie was saying about not reinventing the wheel when it comes to your governing document. Brilliant. Okay, lots of questions, and I'm conscious I won't necessarily be able to answer them all, but I will promise you that they will be answered. I want to pick up on this one because we talked about it a little bit in my little myth-busting quiz at the start. And Neil, you touched on it as well in terms of fundraising in of itself is not a charitable purpose. So if a group wants to include a purpose of raising funds for groups outside the UK, first of all, that wouldn't be a charitable purpose. It might be a way of achieving a charitable purpose. Is there anything they need to have in place to ensure that this is all above board? There is some specific guidance, which Aggie might be linking to right now, about charities with a connection to a non-charity, because of course, even if it's a charity in its own country, it would not be a charity in the UK. But is there anything else, Neil, that you think they need to be aware of when they're putting their application in, if they're planning on partnering and giving money
Yeah.
to groups outside the UK?
So fundraising in and of itself isn't a purpose. You can't be a charity if what you want to do is raise funds and then just donate that money to another organisation, and then have the trustees of your charity have no discretion or decision making over how those funds are applied. So if you're just raising money, giving it to somebody else, and then you have no idea really what happens to it, okay, you are not a charity. Okay, that's not a charitable purpose. If, however, you are going to provide grants, so you're going to raise money and then you're going to provide grants where there's a process by which other organisations would apply to you for a grant, you would assess that if you provide that grant, you'd be furthering your charitable purpose, that you have like a grant making criteria and policy in place. And then when that money is then granted to wherever you want to give it to, you've got some way of monitoring it to make sure that it was used for what your charitable purpose is, then that would be okay. So grant making with a criteria, a policy, and a way of monitoring and the discretion of the trustees is the key thing that makes that okay. If you're just raising money, giving it to someone, then you don't know really, you've got no other discretion over what happens to that money. You're not a charity.
Thank you, Neil. Okay, running out of time a little bit, but I can see a couple of people have asked a similar question around amending your charitable purposes. And I wanted to come to Aggie for this if possible. You talked in your section around not being too broad, but then how do you expand at a later date if you need to?
So you can review your charitable purposes, and it's good practice that any charity, I know we had one that was kind of maybe 150 years on the call earlier. Any charity is regularly reviewing their governing document to make sure it's still fit for purpose and as the charity is operating. And part of that is looking at those purposes and making sure what you do still fits with those purposes. If you update your governing document, you need to then contact the Charity Commission and say, look, we're updating the Charity Commission. We'll recheck and say, yes, this is still charitable and that kind of thing. Or say, no, that's not, you can't update to that, whatever it is. So you can check and then talk to the Charity Commission about it. But when you're thinking about being concise, it's more about you don't limit yourself by saying, I'm going to work with only people in the London Borough of Brent or something. Maybe you could say we're going to do all people in Northwest London, specifically Brent, or all people in Northwest London, mostly Brent, something like that. And then you can say you've actually got that already in your charitable purpose, that you could work with anyone there, but you know that you're focused a little bit more, but you haven't limited yourself to only Brent. So it's about thinking about how do you be really clear while not kind of saying we only work with people of a certain age or something like that, that would then limit you further down.
Fantastic. There's plenty of questions left. We will get them answered and out to you next week. There's a few specific questions around submitting annual accounts and the requirements for different types of charity. This is obviously dependent on your size, your legal structure, and also kind of what's in your governing document as well. And I wonder if we could potentially just put a link to the correct Charity Commission guidance in the chat just before we finish up, as that might answer a lot of the questions people have around their reporting requirements. There were questions around whether you need to bring in an auditor or an independent examiner. And there's some quite clear guidance from the Commission on that, as there are on most things, of course. I want to finish off with a final question to Luca. We heard your kind of top 5 top tips, but just to round us off before I just finish off with the signposting, is there one thing that you might have done differently if you knew then what you know now?
Well, I think touching on the aspect of which I started with, which is less is more. I think done differently, we would have put less information. We threw loads of information in there. We were very excitable with the information that we put in. And now that Amy shared that she's a trustee, Amy was like, I think we need to put a little bit less in, but we were all quite excited and put quite a lot of stuff in. And I think on reflection, we should have just put a little bit less in, like Aggie said, being a little bit more concise and cuter with actually what we were planning to do. I think we were just very excited and very wanted to kind of show just how important and how valuable we were to the sector. So I think we would have probably done something different. I think that's probably the main thing that we would have done differently. And again, the only other thing to say is, now listening to this conversation, listen to what Neil's been saying, we, as it was happening and as the questions kept coming back, we kind of took it quite negatively, I think, given the organization that we are and given the kind of cultural environment that we're in, and the fact that, LGBTQI plus people are kind of daily kind of, there's not a lot of nice stuff happening out there towards our community. When the questions kept coming back, we probably took it a little bit personally because it's a personal cause. But looking at from what Neil's been saying, and it's kind of like, okay, so maybe it was more constructive than the way we were taking it, and so that's a reflection for us, but maybe that's also a reflection for the Commission as well, to kind of how those questions can kind of come backwards and forwards. We built quite a good relationship with our contact at the Commission. We wanted, and I think that's something that's quite important as well, to have that open dialogue between both ourselves and the Commission, because ultimately they want what's best for the charity sector, and we want what's best for queer people in the charity sector. So we're all kind of working towards the same goal.
Fantastic. Thank you, Luca. That's a really good sentiment to end on. If we could just quickly get the slides back up while I just wrap up, and thank you. Next slide, please. Okay, so you're just going to get a quick feedback poll pop up on your screen. I know everybody needs to head off, but we would be so grateful if you could please answer that poll. If Leah, you could just launch that poll for me, please. Thank you. So we really do take this learning seriously when it comes to planning our next webinars. Let us know how you feel. And then once you leave this webinar, you will get a link to a longer Zoom survey, which we would be so grateful if you could complete that for us. Thank you. There are 2 questions on this poll, so don't forget to scroll down. And please don't worry, we will get those questions answered to you. I'll take that on myself. Really fab to see all the feedback in the chat. Please do take the time to also fill out the feedback survey. Okay, fantastic. If we could just end that poll and move on to the next slide, please, Josie. Just the next slide, please, Josie. I won't run through it too much, but just to let you know that there are plenty of resources in these slides when you receive, which you've already received. So links here to guidance from NCVO, the Charity Commission, as well as our small charity help desk at NCVO, where you can call us for any questions about the setup or running of your voluntary organisation. Next slide. And of course, I can't let you all go without mentioning that next week is Trustees Week, when we're going to be celebrating the people who keep charities strong, strategic and accountable. We're running a series of events. Leah, our events manager, who's on the call today, has been working really hard on those. So we've got events all week, and you can access the landing page for Trustees Week via the QR code in the slides, and we'll make sure to include some follow-up information as well. Next slide, please. And finally, I wanted to highlight to you our next practical support webinar in partnership with the Charity Finance Group, all about communicating effectively with your bank and making sure you know how and when to escalate any issues that you have with your bank, which you can access again via the QR code. Next slide. And finally, I just want to make sure that I have said a huge thank you to all of you for joining us today, but especially to our three fantastic speakers, Neil, Aggie, and Luca, who was getting a lot of love in the chat there for sharing their experience of registering proud change makers. We'll include links to all the things they talked about so you can check them out. But thank you again to everyone for being here. I just want to remind you again that small charities and voluntary organisations with an income of under £30,000 can join NCVO for free and access all of our great resources, templates, get a 30% discount on our training, amongst other things. And again, you can access via the QR code on your phone there on the screen. So thank you again, everyone. We will get some follow-up to you out next week, but I hope to see some of you at our Trustees Week events next week as well. Thank you, everyone. Enjoy the rest of your day.